Now we want to look at lesson 5. And in many ways, this is the crucial lesson. Always be praying for others. Notice what the text says, for all the saints. That is a section you want to really focus in on as a Christian leader. Praying for all the saints. The major point is intercessory prayer, praying for others. We're in a Christian warfare. We're a Christian army. We have the Christian armor on. And then we go into Christian warfare with prayer. But notice we're praying for other people. It's so important to realize as elders of the church, we have a ministry of prayer interceding for others. In 1 Samuel chapter 12, verse 23, the great prophet and priest Samuel says this to the people, "Far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you." Can I read that to you again? This often convicts me. "Far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you." In other words, Samuel said this, if I don't pray for you, it would be a sin against the Lord. He was called to pray for the people. You have been called to pray for one another and to pray for the people. Now I want you to notice carefully what he says here. He says pray for all the saints. Notice the word all. We see it all through this section. So it's the priority of prayer in every dimension of life. Now here it's intercessory prayer. We're believer priests. We have this wonderful ministry to pray for other people. So often Christian people say, I don't know what to do in the Christian life. Well, here's something to do. Pray. Pray for other people. Have a ministry before God, as a priest before God, to be praying for people. Lifting them up, bearing them up to God, appealing to God for them. Now, he says for all the saints. How can you do this practically? Now, when he says all the saints, he's certainly thinking about the people in your local church, maybe your missionaries, the people within your sphere of ministry. Now, how do we pray for all the saints? Let's don't just read this and pass over it. It's a nice saying. We have to implement these truths. We have to be doers of the word, not just hearers of the word. Well, how do you pray for all the saints? Well, I'll just give you my way of doing it. We have a church directory here, and I take my church directory, and every day I go through a number of families and a number of names. I also pray for the children. Remember, children are people too. And this way you get to know the children. And when you see them on Sunday, you can say, "Oh, I prayed for you this week." That'll give a great impression in their mind someday. And very often, if I'm praying for someone who has very severe problems, after I pray, I'll call them up and just say, "I want you to know, I was praying for you today. Is there anything else I need to know as I seek to pray for you?" And that touches people deeply. And if people ask you to pray for them, make sure you write it down. And you do pray for them. Don't say, "Oh, I'll pray for you," and you don't pray for them. That's a lie. If you say to people, "I'll pray for you," you make sure you pray for them. So that's the way I pray for all the saints. Every day, consistently, I go down and I pray for families in our church. So, what's your method for praying for all the saints? Don't just read this and hear this and agree with this, but don't do anything. Somehow you have to implement this great command, pray for all the saints. We are in a war. It's enemy-occupied territory. The war doesn't end. It's not until we get to heaven. But here on this earth, there's a curse on this earth. So it's a world at war. So prayer is one of our major tools for this warfare. And remember, everything we do is dependent on prayer. Now, lesson 6. Lesson 6 is very similar to lesson 5. Lesson 6, always be praying for missionaries and the gospel. Now, Paul follows his own advice, and he says, pray for all the saints. Well, he's a saint, and so I want you to look at verse 19. Please look at this in your own Bibles. And also for me. Pray for all the saints. Pray also for me. I'm a saint, and I need a lot of prayer. That words may be given to me in opening my mouth boldly to proclaim the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that I may declare it boldly as I ought to speak. Paul has two prayer requests from the church. Pray for clarity in the gospel and for courage and boldness in spreading the gospel. Now remember, when Paul wrote this, he was in Rome and he was in prison. And he is speaking to pagan Romans who have many, many gods, and they're very proud of their many, many gods and their long history. It's very hard to make the gospel clear to them. So he says, pray that I will have the wisdom to know how to communicate the gospel to these polytheistic people who reject Christ, who reject the Old Testament. And then pray that I'll have boldness with them. I will not be full of fear and timidity, but I will be bold in proclaiming Christ. These are two prayer requests we need for all our missionaries and we need for ourselves. So as a missionary, he says, pray for me that I'll be bold in the gospel and that I'll make it clear. And my dear friends, we should be praying this way for every one of our missionaries, that they will have open doors, they will be more skilled and effective in communicating the gospel to a postmodern world, and that they will have courage. It's been said, if missionaries are dependent on your prayers, how are they doing? If missionaries are dependent on your prayers, how are they doing? So, pray for all the saints. As an elder, that is your ministry. As an eldership, as a group of elders, that's your ministry. Praying for all the saints, and then be praying for the gospel to go forward. Now, let me conclude here with some very practical ideas of how, as an eldership, you can improve your prayer time. This is something you need to think about and be strategizing and evaluating how, as a group of elders, can you be improving your prayers. Don't fall into a prayer rut. So let me just give you some ideas of how to do this. Use a prayer guide. Use a prayer guide. When our elders come together, and as soon as two men are there, they sit down, and right at every table there is a guide, a complete prayer guide that has been prepared just for that evening. And they just start praying right away. I've been in elders meetings where they try to collect prayer requests, and they waste 10, 15 minutes just collecting prayer requests. Everything's right there in front of us. And we just start praying right away, so we use our time effectively. And now people during prayer can yell out prayer requests or give a prayer request, but we're ready to go as soon as we meet together. And that prayer guide is the same guide each week, although it's changed and moved around a little bit. It's right there. We know it. We know how it's organized, the different categories of people we're praying for, the sick, new believers, missionaries, and that way we don't fall into a prayer rut. So use a prayer guide effectively so you don't waste your time that you are meeting together for prayer. And then appoint a prayer facilitator. Now let me explain what this is. You have a group of elders, they're meeting together for prayer, and they have a prayer guide in front of them. You have a prayer facilitator that makes sure the prayer time is going and moving along, and there's not lagging. Or if there's maybe a long lag, or maybe the men are tired from a long day at work, the prayer facilitator say, well, let's just sing a song right now. We'll sing a song. Let's break up into small breakout groups and pray for one another and pray for our families. And the prayer facilitator is watching the prayer time so it doesn't just fall into a sleepy mode or become complacent. Prayer facilitator is very good, and the prayer facilitator allows for a change and variety within the prayer time. Again, do not fall into the prayer rut, just doing the same thing, mindlessly praying. And then third, use shorter prayers. If you're with a group of men or women or whoever you're with, if one person gets up and they pray for 5 minutes, most people fall asleep. Their minds go off. So keep your prayers short, keep them focused, and then many, many people can get involved in prayer, not just one or two people. This is often a big problem. Some people just go on and on. Sometimes they repeat the same prayer request 2 or 3 different ways, or they have some flowery words they want to say. Well, that's all right in your own private devotions, but this is a group prayer time, so we have to be thinking of the others, and we have to be focused, and it needs to allow for others to pray. And that way, each one can pray many times during a prayer time. So, be careful of long, drawn-out prayers that can even put the most spiritually minded person to sleep. And then, use prayer request cards of the church. Let me illustrate this for you. We think we know our congregation. We know the needs. Well, we put out these new prayer cards and we told the congregation we want to be praying elders. And that's what Acts 6:4 says, devoting yourself to prayer and the ministry of the word. So we put these prayer cards out and we start getting them back. And we think we know the congregation. I mean, we were reading these prayer cards. It was depressing. One of my children ran away. We have no money. My husband's going to lose his job. We're facing cancer. We're fighting at home. I mean, we started reading these cards. So we realized we have to draw the prayer requests out of the people. Often they will not tell you. So put something in the pew or hand out occasionally in your church bulletin a prayer request card from the congregation so the elders can be known as men of prayer. Information is vital to prayer. Without that information, you do not pray as you should pray. And then 5, break into small groups for prayer. So you have a group, maybe 5 men, or maybe you have many more elders. You are meeting for prayer, and maybe you've been praying for 6 or 7 minutes. Then break the group out into groups of 2 and pray for one another. Pray for your families. Pray for work. Pray for special needs. And then come back together again. This keeps the prayer time moving and it also personalizes it. And then 6, singing. Start your prayer time with singing, or in the middle of your singing. If things start to get dull and people are just sort of getting little mini naps, say, let's sing a song. Or you may even have the music right out or the words right out there, always with you, a new song for each time. I really find there's a great connection between singing and prayer. And you can sing your prayers, but it revives the soul and it gets you going again. Maybe stand. Don't just sit all the time. Maybe kneel. Try different postures. And then be specific. Number 7. Pray for people by name. During your prayer time, choose several families that you focus in on. We usually focus in on 2 or 3 families at each time that the elders meet weekly for prayer. And be very specific. The Lord wants you to be specific. And then 8, be creative. Be creative in your prayer times. Talk about how you can improve your prayer time. Evaluate your prayer time. Be honest about it. If it's sleepy, if it's dull, if you feel you're just talking to the ceiling, if you're just going through the motions, do something about it. Be creative. Use some of these ideas that I have given you from some of the great prayer warriors. But don't fall into a prayer rut. Do something about it. Your prayers are vital to your ministry. It is your ministry in many ways. And everything you do is to be blessed by prayer and dependent upon prayer to God. Let me close with reading one of the finest quotations I've ever encountered on prayer, and it comes from Martin Lloyd-Jones, his book, Sermon on the Mountain. Listen very carefully to this. When a man is speaking to God, he is at his very acme. It is the highest achievement of the human soul, and therefore it is at the same time the ultimate test of a man's true spiritual condition. There is nothing that tells the truth about us as Christian people so much as our prayer life. Everything we do in the Christian life is easier than prayer. Let us be praying elders.